Hello, welcome to that series of videos about mixing orchestras in live situations. My name is Carsten Kümmel and I'm a live sound engineer for more than 20 years, working with companies and artists like Disney, BBC or Hans Zimmer, Robin Gibb. And so nearly 100% of my work I'm doing, besides that I'm a professor for live sound at a university in Darmstadt, is with orchestras, and orchestras in all their surroundings, with pure operas or classical symphonic concerts or musicals, film music, or even crossovers. I want to show and share with you my way of working with orchestras in all these different kind of situations. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the video where I would like to show you my way how to treat symphonic concerts in the live world. I want to go a little bit more in detail about the staging and the positioning of an orchestra. More or less there are two different ways of setting up an orchestra. One is called the European method and one is called the American method. The American method is the more common one. It is the situation where you have the first violins on the left side from the audience, then the second violins behind them, the violas and the cello. And behind the cello you have the double basses, as you can see in my drawing. A little bit theory about the positioning of the musician is, why are the strings placed in the way towards the conductor as they are? There are some small issues. For example, when you're holding the violin like that, it is like that on your shoulder, pointing towards the audience, because you're at the position of the conductor, there's the audience. Which means the high frequencies, the silver shimmer I want to get from the first violins is already pointing towards the audience. The second violins are located in the American positioning behind the first violins. So the higher frequencies of the second violins get covered by the players of the first violins. And of course that's what the composer wants to achieve. The second violins have to have a little bit warmer sound than the first violins. And it's just achieved by the sound which cannot bend enough or which is covered from the first violins towards the audience. The sound that way gets warmer and warmer up till you come to the cello and to the basses. In the European setup, you have on the left side from the audience the first violins. Then behind the first violins you have the cello, then the violas, and then on the far right side the second violins. So the first and the second violins are sitting face to face. The uprights, or the double basses, are mostly as well on the right side, but in the original European setup the double basses are divided and placed behind all other strings. What are the advantages of that seating of the orchestra? Again, you have the high frequencies of the first violins going to the audience. You have the cello going much straight forward, having a more direct sound towards the audience. The second violins are playing with the backside to the audience. They are sitting on the right of the conductor, so the higher frequencies go in the orchestra and the backside of the instrument shows to the audience. There are some compositions where you have a question and answer games between first and second violins. And for the audience it's much more attractive when you have the questioning on the left side from the first violins and then the answer from the second violins on the right side. So you have like a ping pong effect. And there's something very interesting and very stunning about the basses, which are located behind the strings. There's a phenomenon that As soon as you put low frequencies as an instrument behind the instruments which produce the high frequencies, in generally the first violins, the high frequencies of the first violins travel further away. Sounds funny, but it is that way. Okay, the positioning of the woodwinds. There's no difference now between American and the European setup. You have in the middle of the orchestra, directly behind the strings, on the left side from the audience, you have the flute players, most of the time 2 or 3. Then directly on the right to them, 2 or 3 oboe players, and the third oboe player very often plays English horn. On the second row behind them, you have on the left side 3 clarinet players, 2 or 3 clarinet players, and on the right side you have 2 or 3 bassoon players, depending on the music, if you call it a 2-people section or a 3-people section. Sometimes you find on stages which are pretty narrow, or which are not deep enough, you have the possibility of place all the woodwinds in one row. And normally that starts with the flute on the left side, then come the oboe, then the clarinets, and then the bassoons. Sound-wise, it's not as compact and it's not as good for the feeling of the musicians. The woodwind players, they are used to have, or the flute player is used to have a clarinet player behind him. And so it's a much more compact sound. And for the audience as well, it's better when you have the feeling that all the woodwinds are coming from one point and not from a whole line. On the left side from the audience, you have the horn players, up to 6 horn players, or when we go to Wagner, even more. Strange thing is that these horn players seem to be separated from the brass players, so which means the trumpets, the trombones, and the tuba, which are on the opposite side of the orchestra. Why is that? It is, you can create a huge image, and in fact the horns have a different role in the orchestra. Some people even say the horn players, they don't belong to the brass players. They are something like in between woodwinds and brass. And indeed, the sound of the horns is a very warm sounding. Behind the woodwinds and the brass and the French horns, you have the percussions. The percussions, they can vary a lot depending from the music. Whether you are in classical music, I mean really the classical time where you sometimes only have 2 timpanis, or the Baroque times, or if we go to newer music where you have much more, you have a grand cassa, you have tubular bells, marimba, vibraphone, a lot of percussion. And so this setup is much more free, and that varies from stage to stage. My job is to recreate the situation as it is in a real concert hall, because that is what the audience is used to. And the nice thing is you just have first to listen to the orchestra totally unamplified, maybe in a concert hall. So go in concerts whenever it's possible and just listen to concerts without amplification. But there is a very bad thing. With amplification, it's nearly impossible to reach that goal. But we can do our best to go as far as possible to imitate the real world. So, what do I want to achieve? Or what is my philosophy? I want to have the concert or the sound as if I would sit in the 10th row. So I really go on an area, on a venue, and I would look for a place where would I love to sit and to listen to that music. And that is a point which is very important for me, just to imagine this is my point, and this is where I first listen to the orchestra without any amplification. There's another point. All classical orchestras or nearly all, they are afraid of live sound situations, of amplification. They're really afraid of that because they have a lot of very bad experiences. And what I try in the beginning is just to get a good relationship to the musicians. So to create trust. And how do I do that? And to be honest, that's pretty easy. And 50% of my work is done prior the very first note. What do? I ask the conductor that I would like to speak some words to the orchestra. So I'm on stage and I welcome the orchestra and say a few words about my work, about the sound check, how it's going, and just to create trust, to give them the feeling they're in good hands. That's 50% of my work. The choice of the right loudness, I mean loudness, not volume. So the felt volume is very important for me. Your job is to transmit the orchestra in a natural way, to set the level of the orchestra to a point where you and the audience feel well. Where is that point? The point is, for me personally, when I make the orchestra a bit too loud, suddenly the sound of the orchestra jumps from the stage to the loudspeakers. Then I have a clear sound of the loudspeakers. Could be a good sound of the loudspeakers, but that's, for me, too loud. And even if you make work with time aligning the PA or whatever, even if you give too much, it will always sound as if the sound is coming from the loudspeakers when you're too loud. Not good. Because the audience will have the same experience. And they don't want to listen to loudspeakers. They want to listen to the orchestra. Sometimes, after concerts, people from the audience are coming to me and saying, "What are you doing here? Is it a recording?" No, sir, it's a live sound, it's an amplification. Well, was it amplified? And that's the point when I know that I reached my goal. PA design for classical concerts, symphonic concerts. More or less, I could speak hours about that. But right in the moment, we keep it a little bit more general because the classical concert could take place on an open air for 1,000 people or in one open air for 100,000 people. So, of course, these two situations have absolutely different needs concerning the PA. I would like to say my way of what I need for a PA design in general for symphonic situations. Let's start with the near fields. I come to a concert and there are near fields set up. I need the near fields, mainly for the moderator. For the concert, I don't need near fields. Why? Because, as I explained with the loudness, I try to keep the volume pretty low, to have the natural feeling. So the first rows, they already hear the orchestra by itself. So they absolutely do not need additional loudspeakers. Therefore, as I said before, a loudspeaker to have a good concert is not the best choice to give a concert, but that's a choice we have to use when we have the large scale concerts, but not for the first row. You sit in front of an orchestra or a big body of a lot of instruments, and they work together for more than 200, 300, 400 years. They are the whole arrangement, the whole setup of the orchestra is already working. So, for seats and places where they are loud enough, with a loudspeaker you make it worse, not better. What about the subs? Do we need subs? Oh yes. Very often I'm in the situation that people say, come on, classic, they don't need so much sub-lows. Totally wrong. Normally, when you measure a PA, you have the Fletcher-Munson curves you consider, and that's why the reason you have rates in low frequencies compared to 1K. So normally you have the 50 Hertz about 12 to 15 dBs higher than the 1K, which is more or less that what you have in the Fletcher-Munson curve with a volume of 95 dB sound pressure level. So in classical concerts, I'm below the 95 dB SPL, which means, according to the Fletcher-Munson curve, I even have to give more energy in the low frequencies compared to the mid and high frequencies. And that's why in classical concerts I have the sub-lows running at least about 15 dBs higher than the 1K. We have the situation, I need sub-lows, and I give, in relation to the whole volume or loudness, I give a lot of energy in the sub-lows. Where to place them? There are many possible configurations about sub-low speakers, and as I mentioned, I need a lot of them. So we can make a bass line in front of the stage. We can have stacked and fired system, which I love a lot, but not in that situation. So a lot of these ground stacked sub-low situations. And what's happening? I just talked about the listening situations of the people in the first rows. The better is they get non-amplification of near fills, but then they would sit right directly in front of sub-low speakers. Cool. So that means that is a big distortion for these people in the first rows, having direct sound from the orchestra and the direct sound of sub-low speakers. Definitely not the situation you want to give them. And because of the distortion the people would have in the first rows, I prefer much more to have flown subs as often as possible. Of course it needs a higher budget, and sometimes you have to find compromises, but we are speaking here about the best situations and the best solutions you can offer and what you can do. And for these natural sounds, fly the sub-lows. You can make an end fired, maybe a mono end fired above the stage, and which will give you an even coverage of the sub-lows in conjunction with mid and high frequencies. Imagine to go back to a concert hall. What is the big difference between an open air and a concert hall? Reflections. There are a lot of reflections from the side walls, from the ceiling, from the back side, and they will put you in a cloud where you can have the natural sound experience. As soon as we are outside on an open air, and of course we have the best reverberation machines or whatever, but they are all coming from the front, and that's totally different to that what you experience in a concert hall, because all the reflections, most of the people are hearing more reflections than direct sound from the orchestra. And this is what I want to give to the audience. There are several ways how I can do that surround sound. For example, you can use a lot of these 3D systems, which are working all very good. But the setting up and all the adjustments of these systems make it very expensive. It's nice to work with them, absolutely, but most of the time there's no budget therefore. And what I try in my way is to set up surround speakers and add reverberation on it. Reverberation, or just sometimes, depending on the environment, some early reflections to give the audience this cloud they are used in concert halls. But as soon as you need or you want to use surround loudspeakers, there's one thing you really have to take care about. Place them in a distance to the audience where you don't annoy the people who are sitting nearest to that loudspeaker. So the seat which is nearest to the surround speaker always has to listen the PA first and then the surround loudspeaker, and the level of that surround speaker must be adjusted that way that you do not annoy the people sitting there. Okay, microphones. Which microphones do I use and how do I use them? Here I have a collection of some of my absolute preferred microphones. I will make a short explanation of them. So we have here the Neumann KM series or KK series. The difference is that I can, for example, here with a KK 183, I can exchange the capsules, and on the KM series the capsule is fixed. This microphone, the KM series, is one of the best microphones you can get concerning the price-performance ratio. They are not so expensive, and yeah, they are like a working horse. So we have here the 185, which is the hypercardioid, the 183 as the omnidirectional, and the 184, which is a cardioid microphone. So on the other hand, we have from Sennheiser the MKH series, and while they give me a sound which brings the silver shimmer on the strings for you, these are a little bit more on the warm sounding size, and for me the best orchestra microphone you can get nowadays. Incredible what the sound is coming out of them. We have here the 8020, which is the omnidirectional. We have the 8050 as a hypercardioid, and here the 8040 as a cardioid microphone. But that's not all what we have from the MKH series. We have microphones where we can change the polar pattern, and so we have here the MKH 800. It gives a big variety whether to come from a omnidirectional, wide cardioid, hypercardioid, or figure of 8 microphone. We can adjust level and the filters. So it has 2 cardioid membranes in the capsule and gives you, yeah, everything what you need. Mainly I use this as a main microphone system. Or on the other hand, microphone I totally love. This is the same capsule as here, but as you see, you don't have the fixed polar patterns. You have 5-pin connector, so both capsules come out of the microphone with an extra signal, and you put it on 2 channels on your console, and you can stepless adjust the characteristics even on a later point. So if you just sum up both channels of the microphone on same level, you get an omnidirectional microphone. If you inverse the polarity of one of the capsules, you get a figure of 8. And then with a level adjustment, you can stepless go from an omnidirectional microphone to a figure of 8. Really incredible, because even as well for recordings in the post-pro or in a sound check, you can just choose what you need. Really incredible microphone. Here we have a Neumann TLM 170, so a large membrane microphone with adjustable polar pattern. And this I like especially because the way it sounds. A little bit later I will talk about the difference between large membrane and small membrane. Before that I want to show you another microphone which I use a lot of for the solo singers in operas. It's an MKE2. You stick it to the cheeks of the singers, or you hide it in the hair depending on the clothes the singers are wearing. That's the normal microphone you use in operas. Okay, but there's another very nice thing that I use this microphone as well a lot in bands, film music, a lot of in percussion. I will show you later. In symphonic music, when we want to have that naturalist sound, sorry for you, but I never use large membrane microphones. I only use small membrane microphones like these. Why? In that microphone setup, hardly any single microphone is going with its 0-degree direction on an instrument. I want to have several instruments just to be recorded by a single microphone. And this is incredible with the MKH from Sennheiser or the KAMs from Neumann, because all manufacturers can give you a good sound in 0-degree direction. But as soon as the sound is coming from the side to the microphone, there it shows which microphones are good and which one are not good. But nearly every single microphone of the 50 or 60 or 70 microphones I have in an orchestra, maybe 2 or 3 of them I use with a 0-degree direction. All the rest I collect the sound from the side, because, for example, 2 flute players, 1 microphone. I don't want to use 2 microphones for two players, because I want to have a distance to the instrument. And as soon as I have a distance to the instrument with 2 microphones, the microphones have not such a big distance to each other. And that results in a big comb filter in the microphone signals. That's why I want to have the distance. I place the microphone between 2 players, and that's why I have the need of a good microphone for the side sound, and I get a smaller channel count and a better blending of all instruments together. In symphonic music, when you suspend microphones, sometimes you have these microphones at that size or that size, and it can look pretty ugly in the optics. When this is the case and you use omnidirectional microphones, with these KK from Neumann, you can just separate the amplifier from the capsule, and then you can use this cable, which is a much more thin cable, and you can separate the amplifier from the capsule. And then you only have this small part which is suspended from the ceiling. It's looking much better. Let's look at all the groups. I want to show you how I set up the microphones for the first and second violins and the violas. Let's go and let's have a look. Now I want to show you my way of setting up the microphones for violins and violas. Therefore, thank you to the ladies and the gentlemen to help out. We have a typical situation. So here's the conductor, first violin, first row, second violin, second row, and so on and so on. Maybe 14 players, which means 7 rows, 16 players, 12 players. This can vary throughout all the orchestras. So we have here first violins. We have the first row and the second row, and I set up a microphone setup which you will find pretty often. That's not my way, how I set up. A little bit later we come to my way, but I want to show you that way and what happens in that way. For microphones here on the left we have a KK184 from Neumann. It's a cardioid microphone and one, in my opinion, one of the most versatile microphones you can find. And here you have a KK185, same series, it is a hypercardioid microphone. So, what is here? The setup of the microphone. I mentioned before that never or hardly any microphone is with a 0 degree pointing directly to an instrument. Here the instruments are held on the left side from the players. That's why I'm placing the stand behind the first player, behind the first left player, and the microphone is directly in the middle between these two instruments just to gain the same level of the instruments. That's why it's very important that you have microphones which have as well a very good spectrum for sound which is coming from the side. By the way, a placement of the microphone stand behind the player is always pretty clever because you don't disturb the player in playing. Sometimes you see it that a microphone stand is somewhere here, but then, of course, your arm would just hit the music stand, the microphone stand. So this is the right position. So let's imagine we have 7 rows of first violins, so we have 7 microphones. It's a pretty high channel count. What's happening sound-wise? Sound-wise, this microphone records 2 players, this microphone records 2 players, and this results in a sound where you not really get a whole string section. You get spots of 2 players, 2 players, 2 players. All these players are not melting together, but that is what we want in a string section. There's a pretty easy way which simplifies your work, and it's much easier to handle, and it decreases the channel count as well. We don't need 1 microphone per row, so let's just put 1 microphone away, and we can record or transmit these 4 players just with 1 microphone. Very simple, just by pointing the microphone towards the second row. So what's happening? It's a cardioid microphone. We have 2 distance. We have 1 far distance from the second row to the microphone and 1 close distance from the first row to the microphone. Because it's a cardioid microphone, we have 60 dB less in level because the cardioid microphone records 60 dB less of the sound which is coming from the side. And that equals out with a double distance the second row has towards the microphone. The result is 1 microphone, 4 players in the microphone with the same level, but a much better blending of the sound of the single instrument. With 14 players, you just have to do it 3 times and 1 additional for the last 2 players. But let's have a look at the violas. Now you're viola players, and with the viola players you have a brass section directly behind them. So in fortissimo you can imagine that a trumpet which is sitting there is directly more or less playing in that microphone, and a trumpet can play louder than a viola. So that creates a problem. But that what is working from the front to the rear is as well working the other way around. Let's swap to the other microphone, back to the KK185. And we place it behind the second row. And now we do it the same way. From the second row, we point the microphone to the first row. Now the same the other way around. A close distance and a far distance. This distance more or less is double the distance than from here to here. Again, we have the effects of the side, not exactly 60 dB, because now we change to a hypercardioid microphone, but it equals out, and we have these players again as a melting sound and 4 players together. But the trumpet, here, a hypercardioid has the dead point of the microphone in that direction. And now the trumpet is playing into the dead point, and that decreases immense the bleeding of the trumpets in that microphone. And so, even in fortissimos, you still have the sound of the violas. I break up that rule, which I just showed to you with the first violins, second violins and violas. It does not really work anymore as soon as we go to the celli and to the basses. Because the distances I have to use are too big. And that's why it's nearly impossible to get 4 instruments on one single microphone. So I break up that rule, and then I prefer to work with this 185 hypercardioid on the celli. Getting 2 celli placed above the music stand, the microphone, I get 1 meter distance to the celli, and I can record these 2 channels, these 2 instruments, very good, very nice. So I want to have the little bit high amount of high frequencies in the string sections, so that's why the KM series is a perfect choice, therefore. Same with the double basses. In the double basses, I go back to the 184. The instrument is much bigger, so the distance between the instruments is a bit bigger, or between the center of the instruments to each other. That's why I'm choosing the cardioid microphone in front of the double basses. On a small stand, a height of maybe 60-70 centimeters, and I place it in front of the double basses. The double basses can be recorded a little bit closer than the other strings because the problems of the low frequencies in a venue, so I get the extra power and a little bit the attack from the bow on the instrument when I'm a little bit closer than 1 meter in distance to the double basses. Another thing is with the double basses, what you can easily use, because we don't have these loudnesses and the microphone will be covered by all the players around, is an omnidirectional. A lot of people say using omnidirectional microphones in amplification will result in big feedbacks. No, it will not. It is covered by the players, and in symphonic music, as I told before, we don't have the need of this very big volume or loudness. So that's why omnidirectional is working. And the big advantage of an omnidirectional, I don't have a proximity effect. All microphones with other characteristics have a proximity effect. The only microphone which does not have proximity effect is an omnidirectional microphone. So I have still the very low frequencies from the double basses. Okay, let's have a look at the woodwinds, French horns and brass instruments. I want to have a warm sound. That's why I love to work with the MKH on these positions. So more or less I try not to have more than 2 different brands or kinds of microphones in the orchestra. So a mixture of the Neumann KMs and of Sennheiser MKH is for me the preferred choice to work with. The MKH in the woodwinds and in the brass, and the KMs in the strings, which are giving this silver shimmer if needed. If not needed, you can have a warm string sound using the MKH. As I mentioned before, 2 flute players, 1 microphone, 3 flute players, 2 microphones. All the time, don't go too close to the instrument. If I'm the flute player, the microphone about here, absolutely fine. What I want to achieve, to have a working strategy with the same gains on all instruments, is keeping the same distance on all microphones from the instrument. Therefore, for the flute, the microphones have to be a little bit higher than for clarinet and oboe, because the players are holding the instruments like that. And never ever, really never ever, record the sound of a clarinet, a bassoon or an oboe from the funnel of the instrument. The sound of the instrument, there are many holes in that instrument. The sound goes in every direction from that instrument. So one of the good points is like having the microphone like that on the oboe, having a distance, maximum a meter, 80 centimeters is fine, between two players, so you can easily place it between the music stand, the microphone, and then you get a good recording of the oboe, the clarinet, and as well the bassoon. Let's talk about French horns. French horns, the funny instrument with a funnel on the backside of the player. I want to tell you a funny story. It happens so often that when I place a microphone, the French horn players tell me, but the sound is coming from the backside of the instrument. Imagine, which people know the sound of a French horn from the backside? The players are sitting here. It's only the choir singers and the percussion players. Definitely never the audience. So, where to record a French horn? From the perspective of an audience, of course. That means I am the player holding my French horn like that. The microphone has to be here, not on the backside. Besides, if you want a really high frequency, very harsh sound, then sometimes it's needed in film music. Then you can make a combination of the front and the back. But when you listen to your French horns in a concert hall, they always sound like far away. And this is what the audience knows about French horn sound. I never record a French horn from the backside. Sometimes in film music, because that's an artificial sound, but never ever in opera or in symphonic music. Okay. Trumpets, trombones, pretty easy. They play to the front, plays a microphone, MKH, plays a microphone, MKH 8040, in the middle of the instruments. With the trombones, it's a little bit more to the left, because the instrument is on the left shoulder of the players. But let's talk about tuba. It's the large instrument with the sound going upwards. With tuba I have the same thoughts as with the French horns. If the composer would like the audience to hear the sound which is coming out of the funnel of the instrument, then he would have chosen a sousaphone, not a tuba. A tuba in a classical hall is very, very warm. And you don't get this warm sound if you place the microphone above the funnel. As well here, 80-50 maybe, because it's a single instrument, 80-50, 1 meter in front of the tuba player. There you get the warm sound, not if you place it on top of the player. Percussion. All what I was saying about the way of listening to the instruments from the direction of the audience, I have to break up with that as soon as we come to the percussion. It's just by my experience, I tried to microphone percussion in the way how the audience is looking at it. Doesn't work with timpanis. with timpanis, I have to use two 8040 on top and always between two timpanis. So I get two timpanis with one microphone. What I do with the timpanis always is I do not just place them. I'm taking a stick from the player and I play the skin of a timpani, and then I'm listening in the height how the sound changes. And there's a single point when the sound from a timpani goes from a very warm sound to a very clear sound. And that's the point where I place the microphone, because the timpani, they bleed so much low frequencies in all other microphones that I more or less, most of the time, I only need the attack and the clarity of a timpani. And that's why I choose that very high point. Let's come to one of the few microphones I use as a 0 degree microphone, and this is the Grand Casa. The Grand Casa, the very large drum, which is going even an octave lower than a bass drum from a drum set. I want to have this extra push over the edge from that instrument. So it's very low and it can be extremely high in level as well. So therefore I definitely use an 8050 or an KM185, so a hypercardioid. Why? I go extremely close to the skin, to the membrane of that instrument, maybe 3, 4, 5 centimeters. What do I have of that? I increase and I use the proximity effect to get a lot of low frequencies, which I can use then later and really make the people feel the instrument. There I use the proximity effect as a help. So in symphonic music I use all the other percussion places more or less with overheads. I place 4, 5, 6 overheads depending on the music, depending on what we have. So for xylophone, vibraphone, one microphone, pretty high, and some extra positions of the player where they play in one time a triangle, snare drum, cymbals, clavis, whatever they played on one position. There's one microphone. So, and indeed there some players, they think in positions as well, so they build up several positions. Each position, one overhead, and that's more or less fine for symphonic music, because the audience themselves, they have the feeling of that this percussion is far away. And that's why an overhead is fine enough. I don't have to make a close-up microphone system for these instruments. Besides the Grand Casa, I have no clearly explanation therefore, but that's my taste and my work, and I know that is working very well for me. So yeah, that's about the percussion. Let's talk, still in symphonic music, about main microphone systems. Main microphone systems and sound amplification. It seems that this does not come together, but definitely it does. I have all these plenty, huge amount of spot microphones, and I'm in danger of having small islands of single spots I'm listening to. And I'm using a main microphone system to glue all these small islands together. I work a little bit different with main microphone systems than in a recording. In a recording, you're in a very good sounding room, and there the name main microphone system really means what you have to achieve with that. So you suspend or you hang or you put there a main microphone system, whether it's an XY, an ORTF or an AB or whatever, and this has to be perfect. And then if you're missing something, you choose the spot microphones and add them to the main microphone system. That's a little bit different in live sound, because in live sound we never have good sounding rooms. In open airs we have plastic roofs, we have some moving heads which are creating noises by the coolers. We have sometimes rain on the roof, and so definitely not good sounding rooms. Or in arena, it's not that what I will call a good sounding classical concert hall. So the role of the main microphone system is a little bit different. So I create my main sound with the spot microphones, and I want to glue them together. So how do I do that? Therefore, I love to suspend, for example, the Sennheiser MKH800 Twin as an omnidirectional. Why omnidirectional? No proximity effect, so they give me a true sound of that. And I suspend it up to 3 meters. I suspend it whenever I can. I don't use stands close to the conductor because it looks ugly. It's a little bit more work to suspend them, but it's a better looking situation. So normally I use an AB. So there's AB 80 centimeters wide, maybe, above the orchestra. And then I use 2 other omnidirectionals in the same line, but as outriggers further out from the conductor. So the 3 meters to the left side from the conductors and approximately 3 meters to the right side of the conductor. And at the end of the sound check, I just put them on top with a very tiny amount, just to glue all the sound together. That's it. If I need a little bit louder main microphones, with this microphone I have the chance to adjust the characteristics to avoid feedbacks or to just have a look what is doing best. So because I can go stepless from omnidirectional to a figure of 8 microphone. Okay, I think that's pretty much that what I'm doing with symphonic music, and yeah, let's go on with symphonic music. Thank you. Let's talk about monitoring in symphonic concerts. Is there a need of monitoring? How the setup of monitoring should look like? What is the goal of the monitoring? First of all, we have to give the musicians a feeling that they can play as they are used to. Again, copy the environment of a classical concert hall. Let's look at a concert hall. In a concert hall, on the stage, on the left and on the right, on the back of the stage, we have walls which reflect the sound of the orchestra back into the orchestra. And the best way to give the musicians that feeling is build walls. I mean it honestly. There are several systems of mobile walls you can place in an orchestra. As soon as you do that, they feel best. But there are environments, especially like in arenas, when you have a huge amount of people sitting on the very left and on the very right side, a wall, a suspended wall, would block their sidelines. So these are the situations where a suspended wall would, optical-wise, would make the orchestra smaller, and it would just not look good. And in this situation, we have to simulate the concert hall with loudspeakers. Of course, we could use the 3D system, or which are on the market. But honestly, that's a lot of money we spend, which can be achieved in a much more easy way. The people, the human beings, we are listening in a horizontal way. That's the 90% of that what we are listening to. Of course, we can localize in the vertical as well, but the main localization we do is on the horizontal way. There's a pretty cheap way to give the musicians a good feeling on stage, and you just need 4 loudspeakers therefore. Place 2 loudspeakers on the left side and 2 speakers on the right side, as well with a distance of maybe 5 meters, as it would be in a classical concert hall. Very often you copy the left side of the orchestra to the right side and the right side of the orchestra to the left side. So that means, for example, you're a first violin player in the last row and you hear the cello from your back. Imagine that in a concert hall. Is that the way you hear yourself or the orchestra when you're a first violin player in a concert hall? Absolutely not. What is the first you are hearing from the reflections behind you? It's yourself. That's what I do in these monitoring situations. On the left side of the orchestra, on these speakers, I give early reflections of themselves back on these loudspeakers. The same I do on the right side. The cello player or the double bass players first hear the reflections of themselves. So just a reverberation, early reflections. The right side comes from the right side, the left side comes from the left side. That's a copy of the real world. Tried to replicate it with loudspeakers. Besides the loudspeakers placed on the left and right side of the orchestra, I use monitor loudspeakers at the conductor's place. The main reason for these speakers is the communication between front of house and the conductor, because you have to talk to the conductor and to tell him what you need in the sound check from the orchestra. But in surroundings where the sound just goes away from the stage, which is totally different, there's something from my experience what conductors sometimes miss and they will ask for, and this is woodwinds. So you have to give, not always, sometimes the woodwinds with a very tiny amount of level on these loudspeakers. There's a small trick what you can do, because there's a distance between the woodwinds and the conductor. Something about 5-6 meters. Sound travels with a speed of 340 meters per second at 20 degrees Celsius. When you give the sound of the woodwinds on that monitor, the conductor will first listen to the loudspeakers and not to the real woodwinds, which is a mistake. Use this amount of delay caused by the distance of the woodwinds and delay the monitor by these 15-20 milliseconds. And then the conductor will have a localization directly to the woodwinds, but he will get the help of the monitor loudspeakers, and that makes him feel comfortable. Another place where we need monitors are the solo singers or soloists. Does not mean it has to be a singer. It can be a violin player, can be a piano player, cello, whatever kind of concert we just have right in the moment. But most of the time, solo singers need a monitoring. They need mainly themselves in the monitor, nothing else. And I adjust them already when I set up all the technique without the orchestra. So I have a colleague on stage standing in front of the microphone and just telling me the level and the sound of the monitor speaker, and it just should be there a tiny amount, not as in rock and roll that the wedge smacks your face. No, just a tiny bit to help out, to give the feeling of being a little bit bigger. Of course, with these speakers, as often as possible, 2 speakers and on one way, because a phantom middle always sounds a little bit more natural than a single spot. The last situation where we can or where we have the need of monitors is choir. Most of the time, if the concert is with a choir in addition to the orchestra, you will have complaints that the choir will not hear the orchestra. Why? They are standing directly behind that. It's caused because of the percussion, which is between the choir and the harmonic instruments of the orchestra. And indeed, in arenas or open airs, they are missing the roof. And normally the roof gives the reflections to the choir back from the orchestra. And so as soon as they are in venues like arenas, they don't hear the orchestra precise or as they used to. And that's why I'm using 2 loudspeakers at the far side of the choir with a distance as well, again, of 5 meters. The more you increase the distance, the more people in the choir you can serve with that loudspeakers. And then 2 or 3 floor loudspeakers for the first rows to get the middle of the choir. The bigger the choir, the more complicated it gets. On these speakers, I have a post-fader mix of the whole orchestra.